January 1945. London is gripped by the biting cold of the war's final winter. Inside the cramped, smoke-filled study at 10 Downing Street, Winston Churchill sits hunched over his desk. The weight of an entire empire rests on his shoulders. But today, it isn't the German V-2 rockets or the advancing Red Army that has his blood boiling. He is reading intercepted correspondence. Private thoughts never meant for his eyes, let alone the eyes of the Americans. With every line he reads, his face darkens, turning a shade of thunderous purple. The silence of the room is suddenly shattered. Slam! Churchill's hand crashes down on the mahogany desk, sending ash flying from his cigar. "Get me Montgomery, now!" he roars, his voice echoing through the hallowed halls of British power. A young aide hesitates at the door, his voice trembling. "Sir, the field marshal is currently at his tactical headquarters in—" "I do not care if he is in the bowels of hell," Churchill barks, cutting him off with a gaze that could wither steel. "Get him on the secure line immediately." As the aide scurries away, Churchill stands by the window, staring out into the London fog, rereading the document with mounting indignation. It is a private letter from Bernard Montgomery to a fellow British officer regarding the recent Battle of the Bulge. In it, Montgomery's arrogance is laid bare. He describes the American troops as disorganized, labels their high command as amateurish, and smugly suggests that only British grit and his own superior leadership prevented a total American collapse. Churchill's hands shake as he relights his cigar. He knows that if these words reach General Eisenhower or the halls of Congress, the alliance, the very heartbeat of the war effort, will flatline. When the line finally clicks and Montgomery comes on the wire, Churchill doesn't offer a greeting. His voice is a razor-sharp shard of ice. "Bernard, you have just written yourself out of history, and you have very nearly written Britain out of this alliance." This is the untold story of the moment the British Lion had to muzzle his own Desert Rats commander to save the world from a catastrophic political fallout. It was a moment where ego collided with strategy and where the fragile bond between two superpowers almost shattered at the very brink of victory. To understand why Churchill was so utterly terrified by a single letter, we have to look at the landscape of January 1945. The Battle of the Bulge, Germany's final desperate gamble in the Ardennes, had just been contained. It was a brutal, bloody affair where American soldiers had borne the brunt of the onslaught. Despite being caught off guard, it was American blood that stained the snow and American tenacity that eventually broke the German back. However, during the height of the crisis, General Dwight D. Eisenhower had made a purely tactical decision. To streamline communication, he temporarily placed certain American forces under Montgomery's command. It was a move of necessity, not a reflection of competence. But Field Marshal Montgomery, a man whose ego was often as vast as the battlefields he commanded, saw it through a different lens. To Monty, this wasn't a temporary arrangement. It was a divine validation. He truly believed it proved that American generals were out of their depth and that only the professionalism of the British military could steer the Allied ship to port. On January 7th, Montgomery committed his first great sin. He held a press conference that sent shockwaves through the Allied camp. With a tone of condescending superiority, he implied that he had personally rescued the Americans from certain disaster. He spoke as if he were the veteran schoolmaster correcting the mistakes of bumbling students. The reaction from the Americans was nothing short of volcanic. From the frontline GIs to the highest-ranking generals, the insult was felt like a slap in the face. Eisenhower, usually the master of diplomacy, was pushed to his absolute limit. He began to seriously contemplate the unthinkable, asking for Montgomery's relief of command. The alliance was vibrating with a tension that threatened to snap. And then, in the middle of this powder keg, British intelligence intercepted the letter. This wasn't a public statement tailored for a press conference. This was Montgomery's unfiltered truth. In a private correspondence to a fellow British officer, the mask slipped entirely. The language was scathing. Montgomery wrote that American troops were poorly trained and lacked the stomach for modern warfare. He claimed the Ardennes proved that Americans couldn't handle the German army without British guidance. But the line that truly made Churchill's blood run cold was Montgomery's mocking summary. "The Americans got a bloody nose, and they needed us to wipe it for them. It was a staggering display of elitism that dismissed the thousands of American lives lost at Bastogne and beyond. When British intelligence realized the explosive nature of this letter, they didn't just file it away, they rushed it straight to Churchill. They knew that if this letter leaked to the American press, or, heaven forbid, reached General Patton or General Bradley, the Allied partnership would burn to the ground before the sun set. Churchill looked at the letter and saw political dynamite. He understood a reality that Montgomery was too arrogant to see. The world had changed. The alliance was no longer a partnership of equals. It was now asymmetrical. America was the titan, providing the overwhelming majority of the men, the tanks, the planes, and the money. Britain, though heroic, was exhausted after 5 grueling years of total war. They were now the junior partner, and biting the hand that fed them was not just rude, it was strategically suicidal. The secure military line crackled with static as the call was routed through encrypted channels. In his study, Churchill gripped the receiver, his knuckles white. He wasn't just a prime minister in that moment, he was a man desperately trying to prevent a divorce between two nations that had to stay married to survive. When Montgomery finally spoke, likely expecting a congratulatory update on the front lines, Churchill didn't offer a single pleasantry. He didn't ask about the weather in Belgium or the health of the troops. "Bernard," Churchill's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. "I have just read your letter regarding the American forces. Have you completely and utterly taken leave of your senses?" Montgomery, taken aback by the sudden vitriol from his old supporter, reportedly tried to deflect. He argued that it was a private assessment, a professional military critique between comrades, never intended for public consumption. Churchill cut through the excuse like a hot bayonet through silk. "There is no such thing as private in the middle of a world war. Every word you write can be intercepted, every whisper can be leaked, and every insult can be used by our enemies. And by enemies, Bernard, I am not referring to the Germans. You have just handed ammunition to every isolationist in Washington who wants to leave Britain to rot alone." What followed was one of the most devastating verbal flayings ever delivered by a British head of state to a high-ranking officer. Churchill's voice rose as he listed the realities Montgomery had chosen to ignore. "You describe these men as amateurs and disorganized?" Churchill demanded. "These are the same amateurs who stormed the hell of Omaha Beach. These are the men who fought through the hedgerows of Normandy and held the line at Bastogne against impossible odds while you were still checking your maps. Do you truly believe they needed you to wipe their noses?" Churchill paced the room, the cord of the telephone trailing behind him like a tether. "Bernard, you are being more than just wrong. You are being politically catastrophic. Do you grasp the stakes? If Eisenhower sees this letter, he will demand your head on a platter, and I will have no choice but to give it to him. If the American Congress hears of this, they will ask why their sons are dying for a partner that looks down on them with such wretched condescension." The Prime Minister's voice then dropped to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than his shout. "We need the Americans, Bernard. We need their blood to finish this fight. We need their steel to rebuild our shattered cities. We need their friendship for whatever dark world awaits us after Hitler is gone. And you have just insulted them in terms so dismissive that you could poison British-American relations for a generation." For once in his life, the famously talkative Field Marshal Montgomery was stunned into a hollow silence. He had never heard Churchill speak with such cold, calculated fury. He had never been threatened with such absolute ruin. Churchill did not wait for Montgomery to regain his composure. He knew that an arrogant man's silence is a fleeting window of opportunity, and he intended to shatter Montgomery's ego once and for all. He wasn't just giving a lecture, he was issuing a final, non-negotiable ultimatum. "Here is exactly what is going to happen, Bernard," Churchill stated, his voice regaining that terrifyingly calm, prime ministerial authority. "From this second onward, you will cease all private correspondence regarding the character, training, or command of the American forces. You will not whisper a criticism, you will not write a note. You will not even think a disparaging thought that might find its way onto paper." But Churchill knew that simply silencing Montgomery wasn't enough. The damage from the January 7th press conference was already festering like an open wound. He needed a public act of contrition, a total reversal that would leave no room for doubt. Within 48 hours, Churchill continued, you will issue a public statement. It will be unambiguous. It will be effusive. You will acknowledge in the strongest possible terms the courage and the sheer military competence of the American soldier during the Battle of the Bulge. You will credit American command for the victory. You will make it crystal clear to the world that the British and American armies fought as equals under a unified command that you respect entirely. Montgomery tried to protest, attempting to argue that his military assessment was a matter of professional judgment. Churchill's response was a verbal sledgehammer. Bernard, either your military judgment is catastrophically flawed or your ego has blinded you to the reality of the war you are fighting. If you resist me on this, understand one thing. I will not protect you. Eisenhower already wants you gone. Bradley and Patton would celebrate your relief. If this letter leaks, or if you fail to make this statement, I will personally inform General Eisenhower that the British government will raise no objection to your immediate removal from command. The threat was absolute. Churchill was telling Britain's most famous general that he was willing to sacrifice him on the altar of the alliance. He was telling Montgomery that his legacy, the victories in North Africa, the fame of El Alamein, would be erased by the shame of being fired for arrogance. I am sending you the draft language for this statement, Churchill concluded. You will issue it exactly as it is written. Do you understand? Montgomery, the man who considered himself the greatest general of his age, had no moves left. He was trapped between the fury of his prime minister and the looming shadow of professional disgrace. He agreed. True to his word, within 48 hours, Montgomery issued a statement that left the Allied press corps rubbing their eyes in disbelief. Gone was the condescending schoolmaster. In his place was a general who spoke of the exemplary courage of the American GI and the brilliant leadership of his American counterparts. It was a masterpiece of damage control, written by Churchill and performed by a humbled Montgomery. The public statement worked. To the outside world, it appeared as though the Great Alliance had simply had a minor misunderstanding that was now resolved through mutual respect. Eisenhower and the American generals, though still suspicious of Montgomery's sudden change of heart, accepted the apology as a necessary political settlement. The crisis was averted, and the march toward Berlin continued. But behind the scenes, the scars remained. What the American commanders never knew, and what the public wouldn't learn for decades, was that Montgomery's praise was a hollow shell, a script written under the threat of a career-ending firing. Churchill's intervention was a masterclass in strategic realism. He understood something Montgomery never could. The era of British global dominance was over. By 1945, the British Empire was a battered boxer leaning on a younger, stronger partner. Churchill knew that Britain's future, its security, and its seat at the table of the New World Order depended entirely on American goodwill. To Churchill, Montgomery wasn't just being rude, he was being obsolete. The private letter that had sparked the Prime Minister's fury remained locked in classified files for over 30 years. When it was finally declassified in the 1970s, it confirmed the darkest suspicions of historians. It proved that while the Allied generals smiled for the cameras, the backrooms of history were filled with resentment, national pride, and fragile egos. Montgomery never truly changed. In his post-war memoirs, he continued to paint himself as the superior strategist and remained dismissive of the American military machine. But Churchill's legacy was different. Churchill's memoirs were careful to credit American sacrifice in industry, not just out of politeness, but out of a deep understanding that the special relationship was the only thing standing between peace and chaos. The incident at Faux Downing Street serves as a chilling reminder of how close history comes to derailment. A single letter, a moment of vanity, or a lapse in judgment can destroy what millions have died to build. It took Churchill's cold, calculated fury to remind his finest general that in the theater of world war, the mission must always come before the man. When Churchill told Montgomery, "You have just written yourself out of history," he was issuing a warning to all future leaders. Arrogance is a luxury that the powerful can rarely afford. If you found this deep dive into the secret tensions of World War II compelling, hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories from the back rooms where history was truly made. What do you think? Was Churchill right to threaten his own legendary general to please an ally? Or should he have stood up for British pride? Drop a comment below. Thanks for watching, and remember, the greatest leaders know when to defend their own and when to discipline them to serve a larger purpose.